Hey you, and welcome. In this video we will learn about command line interface, CLI for short. Command line interface will be used by backend or the front-end developers, so all the developers use it, and it will be used for any tool that may not have a graphical user interface, and in some cases we'll even use it for tools that have graphical user interface. It's just better to use them in the command line interface or CLI. So let's dive right into it. To get started with CLI, we have to have the terminal or command line or command prompt installed on our system. Luckily for us, those come built in with any operating system you work with. So whether it be Windows, Mac, or Linux, you will have terminal access on Mac, and I think on Windows, it will be command prompt or PowerShell. You can even work with PowerShell there. However, my recommendation for Windows users would be to use Git Bash, which is one of the tools that I've used in the past on Windows. And the reason why I would recommend it is because the commands that we use on Linux or Mac will be exactly the same you would use in in Git Bash. So that way the knowledge will transfer just fine. So I'll say I recommend downloading this for Windows users. For Mac users, even though we do have access to terminal right out of the bat, so if I press Command Space, Spotlight would open and I would type in terminal. That would give me an option to open the terminal, which is great. But I do like to use a variation of it, which is called iTerm2. That's the one I have open in front of me right now. And if you install that, that would be a better way to use terminal in the future. Let me explain why. So if I open iTerm2, which I have installed already, let's maximize this. All right. And if I want to have many tabs open, I need to open many windows for terminal. That's the default behavior for any terminal on any operating system. However, with iTerm, I'm able to open many tabs within the terminal. So if I do Command D, that splits the screen vertically, whereas if Command Shift D, that will split the screens horizontally. So I'll be using that throughout, and it's very easy to move around in different terminals, know what your state looks like. So yeah, it's just a better experience. If you want to stick with the built-in terminal, that's okay too. The commands will be exactly the same. All right, let me make this screen a little bigger. And let's run a few commands. So the one I want to start with is who am I? That's just gonna tell us what the command line looks like. So I type a command, I press enter, and then it gives me a response, which is in this case Zimzim. That's my username on my computer. And let me also split my screen because we're going to learn a little bit about navigating between the folders. Great. I've split my screen. On the left side, I have command line interface. On the right side, I have the Finder. Usually, if you want to go to a certain folder, you want to find a file in your computer, you would use the Finder, which is the graphical user interface. However, in the command line, we don't have that, so we would have to write some commands to navigate to where we need to be. All right, so in command line, if I do pwd, that stands for present working directory, it will tell me which directory I'm currently working in, which in this case is /users/Zimzim. That's the person I'm signed in as right now on my computer. So that's always the home directory. And if I go to my Finder, that's this directory that I'm pointing at right now, and all the folders here are available to me. But in CLI, I cannot see the folders, so how do I get to see all of them? If you type in ls, that will list everything in that directory along with files or folders. There we go. Now that is nice, but it doesn't look exactly the same as on the right side where I have them all listed rather than have them wrap around. So instead of doing that, I will do lsl. Great, now that we have listed all the directories, let's create our own directory where we can create more files inside of. So let me just clear. By typing clear, C-L-E-A-R, I can press enter. It will clear my command prompt and bring everything to the top. I do that a lot because I just want to start fresh. So yeah, next command I will try is mkdir, which is make a directory. And let's call this code. All right, press enter. And you'll see on the right side, a code directory is created, which is right there. Before we go inside the code directory, I just wanted to show you one more command, which is ls space -la. That just means list all the files and directories and hidden files and directories. So A means hidden. And if I press enter, you can see a lot more files are showing now. And some of those files start with dot as the name. So in Linux especially, anything that starts with dot is a hidden file or folder. In this case, there's tons of those. So that's why there's a lot more available to me for if you're viewing. So a lot of times we would do copy pasting using command line, because if you were to use your graphical user interface, those files that are hidden will not be copied over because you never selected them. There is a way to do it in graphical user interface as well, but that's outside the scope. Just wanted to show you that how you can see hidden files as well. I'll go ahead and type clear, press enter. And now let's navigate inside the code folder. To navigate, it is cd space the folder name. Now I don't really have to type the folder name full. If I don't remember the name, I can just press tab. So the closer I get to it. So let me start with C. I'll type C, I'll press tab, and it just gives me code. But if I was to have many directories that start with C, in this case, let's say, which one do we? Documents, desktop, and downloads. They all start with D. I'll press capital D, press tab, and now it gives me options. Which one do you want to go into? Desktop, documents, downloads. I can tab through, select either one. If I like a certain one, let's say in this case desktop, I highlight that and press enter, and then enter again. That takes me directly to the desktop folder. If I do cd space dot dot, brings me back to the home page or the home directory. Clear will clear my command prompt. So that's how we're navigating. Now let's talk a little bit about the periods, because that can be a little confusing. So if I was to do a cd code and I do cd space dot, nothing will change. Not two dots, just one dot. Nothing will change, because in Linux, one dot means current directory. So if I press this, nothing really happens. If I do cd space dot dot, that takes me one directory up. This is called a relative path. If we were to work with absolute path, which would be working from the root directory of our computer. So if I do cd slash, and from here, I have to use IntelliSense because I don't know what is on the root level. I haven't really seen it. So if I tab, it will give me many options, and I can go to, let's say, so I can go to users, and then in users, I can see how many users are there. There's only shared or Zimzim. I'll go to Zimzim. Then I can press tab again. Oh, after selecting it, I press tab again, and so on and so forth. You can just go through using root folder as your absolute path, and starting from there, drilling down to where you need to be. So that's called absolute path, because you're starting from root. Usually we would use relative path because it's easier. We know where we are and where we need to go. It's easier to work with. All right, so that's navigation from folder to folder. Let's create a file for ourselves. In order to do that, we have to type touch and a file name. In this case, I'll name it index.js. Let's start with JavaScript. Great, so that file has been created. If I go to code folder in the GUI, I can see that index.js has been created, the file has been created. And if I was to modify this file directly from the command line, I can work with any of the editors. By default, I know most of the editors will have Nano, or actually Vim is the default, so Vim or Vi for short would work as well. However, we're not going to talk about that. That's a little bit too advanced for this scope. What I'll do instead is I think I have access to Nano, so let's work with Nano editor. So Nano space the file name. Again, I didn't have to type the whole thing. I could just press just write some words that may match the file name and press tab, and that would do the same thing. So if I tab, press enter now. Of course, the file has no content right now, so let's write some content in there. I'll start with writing a function called func and parentheses. Of course, we don't have access to our IDE here. Oh, what did happen there? IDE. So we cannot indent properly. We have to use spaces to indent. Tab will not be allowed, so it's not really ideal way to code. But just to show you that you can modify files directly in the CLI. And if you want to exit right now, we can just say Control X. It will give me a bunch of options, whether I want to save or not. In this case, I do want to save, so I'll type in capital Y, and that's about it. Press enter. Perfect. If I try to read this file again, the content should be there. However, I'm not going to read through Nano Editor, because Nano Editor is an editor. It's going to allow me to modify things. I don't want to modify them. I just want to read. So another command that's available to us is called cat, and we can do index.js. So cat space index.js, and it will just show us what are the content of that file. All right, I want to move this index.js file into its own folder. So not directly in code, because code should have more directories of all the different code I'm going to write, and those directories should have their own code inside it. So what I'll do is I'll use the same command that I've learned before, is mkdir, make a directory, and I'll name it sample. Now I want to move index.js file that is inside my code directory in a nested folder, which will be the sample folder. So if I see on the right hand side, I can of course drag and drop it, but that's no fun. Let's do directly from the CLI. So there's another command called mv, which is move, and I can pass it index.js as the target. So this is the file that I want to move, and then where do I want to move it to? Now here's where I'm going to use a relative path rather than absolute path. Now I could just say sample, and that would work. I don't even need the slash. That would work. But just so it's more readable, let's use our relative path that we've learned before, where dot means current directory, slash, then the folder name, and then slash. Slash at the end is not really necessary, but it is good practice, so we know that a file is going inside a directory. A slash at the end just represents directory in any command. So I'll press enter. There we go. File should be moved. If I go into the sample folder, the index.js is there. So that's how we move files. What if I want to create a new directory on the same level as sample, and I want to copy over the index.js from the sample over to the new directory? So let's take a look at that. I'll create another directory, mkdir sample2, and I will copy a file. In this case, the file is no longer on the inside the code folder. It's in a nested folder called sample. So relative path start slash sample slash index.js, and then space. I'll do relative path again. Now this is again relative to the code, not code folder, not to the sample. I have never changed any directories, so this is all relative to the code folder. And remember to put space cp space dot slash something like that. So every space means a different argument for that command. cp is the command. First argument is the target that I'm going to copy, and the second argument is going to be where do I want to copy that. In this case, it will be in the sample2. And I'll, of course, I can rename it here. That's another option for me. So I'll just say index.js. Yeah, just keep the file name the same. Press enter. And if I go to sample2 in the GUI, I can see index.js exists. So the copy over functionality from the CLI worked exactly how we expected it. All right, let's clear our CLI. And let me just show you one more command before I start removing everything. So I'll say echo a field, let's say echo hello world, and that would just echo back. We would use echo sometimes to echo something and pipe it to another command. If that doesn't make sense right now, no need to worry, but just know that this kind of command exists in case in the future you see a command being used. You know that echo is supposed to just echo something back to you in the CLI. It doesn't really have any other purpose other than that. All right, let's start removing things. So first thing, I want to remove a file. I want to remove the index.js that I created in sample2. So relative path, sample, index.js. Perfect. So that deletes, oh, I did it from sample. Perfect. That's fine. So I deleted it from sample folder. Now I want to delete the sample folder as well. So if I do rm sample, I'm expecting an error, but let me just see. Yes. So when it's a directory, you cannot just say rm and it will just remove. You have to say rmr, which is for recursive. So directories have collection of files. You have to recursively go through each file, delete the files first, then delete the directory. So that's why -r would do that for us. And I say sample, delete, and that deletes my sample folder. I'll clear out and I'll just do rmr and then sample2. Now I may run into problem. If I do, or if any of you do, just make sure you put an F, which is for force delete all the files. But I'll try with just -r, just want to see, yep, it works just fine. I don't have any permission issues, but if you run into any permission issues, work with rm space -r, rf. All right, perfect. That's about it for this video. I'll see you all in the next one.